The studio lights blazed down on the set of Jimmy Fallon's late-night show, illuminating the familiar desk and the plush guest chair where Elon Musk sat, legs crossed, his signature smirk flickering like a candle in a storm. The audience, buzzing with anticipation, had no idea the night was about to veer into uncharted territory. Jimmy, with his boyish charm and practiced ease, leaned forward, his eyes glinting with something sharper than usual. What had started as casual banter about Tesla's latest ventures took a sudden, jagged turn. The host's voice dropped, his tone cutting through the laughter like a blade, as he brought up Elon's family, specifically his child who had come out as transgender years ago. Why, Jimmy pressed, had Elon been so silent about it? Was it shame? Disapproval? The crowd hushed, sensing the shift. Elon's smirk faltered, his fingers tightening around the armrest. The accusation landed like a sucker punch. Jimmy didn't relent, his words deliberate, painting Elon as a man who'd turned, his back on his own flesh and blood. Wasn't it convenient, Jimmy mused aloud, how a futurist who preached about humanity's evolution couldn't evolve enough to embrace his own kid? The audience gasped, some clapping, others shifting uncomfortably. Elon's eyes darted to the side, then back to Jimmy, his jaw clenching as if biting back a flood. What kind of father walks away when their child needs them most? What does it say about a man who can colonize Mars but can't navigate his own home? The questions hung heavy, unanswered, teasing a controversy that felt too real, too raw. Elon tried to interject, his voice cracking slightly, but Jimmy waved him off, leaning into the moment with a prosecutor's zeal. For months, rumors had swirled about Elon's strained relationship with his transgender child, whispers fueled by the child's own public statements about feeling abandoned. Elon had dodged the topic in interviews, deflecting with talk of SpaceX or Neuralink, but tonight there was no escape. Jimmy, usually the affable everyman, had done his homework, wielding the child's own words like evidence in a trial. Elon's face, usually a mask of unshakable confidence, betrayed him now, twitching with something between anger and despair. The audience could feel it, a tension coiling tighter with every second. This wasn't just a talk show spat. It was a public, unraveling, and they were all witnesses. Jimmy sat back, letting the silence stretch, daring Elon to respond. Elon's hands moved to his lap, folding together as if to steady himself. He opened his mouth, then closed it, the weight of the room pressing down on him. The Elon Musk, the world knew the iron-willed visionary, seemed to shrink in that chair, his bravado stripped away by a single piercing accusation. Jimmy's eyes never left him, a hunter watching his prey stumble. The crowd leaned in, hungry for what came next, sensing blood in the water. Could Elon defend himself? Would he crack under the scrutiny? The segment wasn't even halfway done, and already the night felt like a reckoning years in the making. The air in the studio thickened as Elon Musk sat, diminished, under the unrelenting gaze of Jimmy Fallon and a room full of onlookers. The host had struck a nerve, and now he circled, his questions giving way to a quiet, searing commentary. Jimmy recounted the timeline, piecing together moments Elon had sidestepped his child's transition, the years of distance that followed. He spoke of the child's interviews, their voice steady but laced with pain, describing a father who'd once been their hero, now reduced to a ghost. Elon's head dipped slightly, his eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the desk, as if willing himself anywhere but there. The audience watched, transfixed, as the man who'd faced down critics and skeptics with unshakable swagger now seemed to fray at the edges. Jimmy's tone softened, but the edge remained, a calculated shift. To draw the crowd closer, he painted a picture of a child left to navigate their identity alone, while their father chased galaxies and headlines. Elon's silence grew louder, a void that swallowed the room. His hands, once steady, now trembled faintly, betraying the turmoil beneath his polished exterior. The cameras zoomed in, catching every twitch, every flicker of doubt, and the audience at home could see it too, the cracks forming in real time. Jimmy didn't need to raise his voice. His calm delivery was weapon enough, dismantling Elon's armor piece by piece. The guest chair, usually a throne for celebrities to shine, became a cage. Elon shifted, uncrossing his legs, then crossing them again, a restless dance of discomfort. He tried to muster a response, his voice low, halting, something about privacy and personal choices, but it landed flat, drowned by the weight of Jimmy's narrative. The host tilted his head, feigning curiosity, asking why privacy mattered now when Elon lived so publicly in every other way. The question wasn't meant to be answered. It was a mirror held up to Elon's contradictions, and the reflection was brutal. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mix of shock and judgment. Elon's shoulders slumped, a subtle collapse that spoke louder than words. The man who'd stared down bankruptcy, who'd launched rockets against all odds, looked small, exposed, a father failing under the spotlight. Jimmy let the moment linger, his silence as punishing as his words had been. The audience could feel the shift, the power tipping toward the host, leaving Elon stranded in the wreckage of his own myth. His eyes, usually sharp with defiance, dulled, searching for an exit that didn't exist. The segment break loomed, but not before the damage was done, a wound laid bare for all to see. As the commercial break loomed, the studio lights seemed to burn hotter, casting Elon Musk in a harsh, unflinching glow. Jimmy Fallon, sensing the moment's peak, leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of triumph and pity. The audience, still reeling from the onslaught, watched Elon with a collective held breath. His face, once a canvas of unshakable resolve, now bore the strain of a man cornered. His fingers dug into the armrest, knuckles whitening, as if anchoring himself against the tide of humiliation washing over him. Jimmy had stripped away the billionaire's mystique, leaving only a father, flawed and faltering, in its place. The host didn't let up. He pivoted, his voice steady, recounting a specific moment from an old interview where Elon had brushed off questions about his child with a cold, dismissive quip. Jimmy replayed it in his mind for the audience, describing how Elon had laughed, deflecting with a line about focusing on the future, not the past. The crowd bristled, some shaking their heads, others whispering to their neighbors. Elon's eyes flickered up, meeting Jimmy's for a fleeting second, then dropped again, unable to hold the gaze. The memory, dredged up and weaponized, hit like a fresh blow, and his posture sagged further, a visible surrender. Jimmy pressed on, his words slicing deeper. He spoke of the child's resilience, how they'd carved out their own path despite the absence of a father's support. The contrast was stark, a young soul thriving while Elon, the supposed titan, crumbled under scrutiny. The audience latched onto it, their murmurs growing louder, a chorus of disapproval swelling in the room. Elon's lips parted, a weak attempt at defense forming, but his voice caught, a rasp that barely reached the mic. He cleared his throat, tried again, but the words dissolved into a mumble, lost in the hum of the crowd's judgment. The segment. Timer ticked down, and Jimmy delivered his final jab. A quiet observation about how legacy isn't just built in the stars, but in the lives left behind. Elon's head jerked slightly, as if struck, his eyes glistening under the lights. The cameras caught it, a sheen of moisture he couldn't blink away fast enough, and the audience gasped, a ripple of shock spreading through the seats. The break hit, the screen fading to black, but the image lingered. Elon Musk, broken, teetering on the edge of tears, a giant reduced to rubble. The studio hummed back to life after the break, the audience settling into their seats with a restless energy, their eyes locked on Elon Musk. The man who'd entered the stage as a towering figure now sat hunched, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, as if holding himself together. Jimmy Fallon, refreshed and poised, picked up right where he'd left off, his demeanor unshaken, a predator returning to a wounded mark. The lights caught the faint redness rimming Elon's eyes, a detail the cameras lingered on, amplifying his vulnerability for millions watching at home. The crowd's earlier murmurs had hardened into a palpable tension, their sympathy thinning with every passing second. Jimmy shifted gears, his tone now laced with a quiet indignation. He described the broader implications, how Elon's silence on his child's identity echoed beyond the personal, feeding into a world where acceptance still fought to breathe. He didn't shout, didn't need to. His words carried the weight of a moral reckoning. Elon's head stayed low, his breathing shallow, each accusation landing like a stone on his chest. The audience leaned forward, some nodding, others glaring, their judgment sharpening as Jimmy framed Elon not just as a failed father, but as a symbol of something uglier, something cowardly. Elon tried to rally, lifting his chin, his voice trembling as he spoke of his work, his mission to save humanity. But the deflection felt hollow, a desperate grasp at relevance, and Jimmy cut through it with surgical precision. He asked, point blank, why Elon could pour billions into machines and planets, but not a moment into understanding his own child. The question hung unanswered, and Elon's mouth worked silently, no retort forming. His hands unclenched, then clenched again, a restless tick that betrayed his unraveling. The crowd's reaction shifted, a few jeers breaking through, a sound. That visibly jolted him, his shoulders flinching. The host sat back, letting the moment simmer, the silence a spotlight on Elon's collapse. His face, etched with exhaustion, glistened with a thin sheen of sweat, the cracks in his composure widening. The audience could see it, the cameras could see it, a man drowning in his own myth, stripped bare by a truth he couldn't outrun. Jimmy's eyes gleamed victorious, as Elon's defeat settled into something irreversible, a public shaming etched into the night's memory. The studio lights bore down relentlessly, casting Elon Musk in a stark, unforgiving frame as the show barreled forward. Jimmy Fallon, now fully in command, leaned into the desk, his casual posture belying the steel in his voice. The audience, riding the wave of the confrontation, hung on every word, their earlier shock morphing into a quiet, collective disdain. Elon sat across from him, a shadow of the man who'd walked onto the set, his shoulders rounded, his gaze fixed on the floor. The redness in his eyes had deepened, a silent testament to the storm raging beneath his crumbling facade, and the cameras didn't miss a second of it. Jimmy turned the screws tighter, his commentary shifting to Elon's public persona. He dissected the paradox, how a man who preached boldness, who dared the world to dream bigger, could shrink so small when faced with something as human as his child's truth. The host's words were measured, but they cut deep, peeling back, layers of Elon's carefully crafted image. The audience stirred, their faces a mix of fascination and scorn, as Jimmy painted a picture of a hypocrite unmasked. Elon's fingers twitched in his lap, a futile attempt to steady himself, but his body betrayed him, trembling under the weight of the room's scrutiny. Then came the escalation, a moment that tipped the night into chaos. Jimmy leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, asking if Elon's absence had ever kept him awake, if the cost of his empire included a child's trust. The question was a dagger, and Elon's reaction was instant, visceral. His head snapped up, eyes wide and wet, a choked sound escaping his throat before he could stop it. The audience gasped, a sharp intake of breath that filled the studio, as Elon's hand flew to his face, swiping at the tears he couldn't hide. Jimmy didn't flinch, his stare unwavering, letting the silence amplify Elon's breakdown for all to witness. The crowd erupted, a swell of noise, some cheering Jimmy's audacity, others jeering Elon's collapse. He shrank further into the chair, his hand lingering near his eyes as if shielding himself from the onslaught. The man who'd once commanded boardrooms and headlines was reduced to a quivering wreck, his breaths uneven, his defeat laid bare. Jimmy sat back, victorious, the master of a moment that had spiraled beyond control, leaving Elon exposed, humiliated, and utterly broken. The studio pulsed with raw energy as Elon Musk's breakdown reverberated through the room, a spectacle no one could peel their eyes from. Jimmy Fallon, perched at his desk, let the chaos settle, his expression a blend of satisfaction and resolve. The audience, now a roiling sea of reactions, fed off the tension, their cheers and jeers clashing in a cacophony that drowned out the last threads of Elon's dignity. He sat, crumpled in the guest chair, his hand still hovering near his face, wiping at the tears that refused to stop. The cameras circled like vultures, capturing every shudder, every falter, broadcasting his ruin to a world that thrived on such falls. Jimmy seized the moment, his voice rising above the din, sharp and unrelenting. He spoke of accountability, how even the mightiest couldn't escape the consequences of their choices. He didn't name Elon's child again, didn't need to. The wound was already open, bleeding for all to see. The host's words were a rallying cry, a call to the audience to judge the man before them, not the myth. Elon's head bowed lower, his breaths hitching, each syllable from Jimmy pushing him deeper into the abyss. The crowd responded, their noise swelling, a tidal wave of disapproval crashing over him. Elon tried to speak, his voice a broken whisper, pleading for a chance to explain. He mentioned love, duty, things he'd meant to do, but the words stumbled, incoherent, swallowed by the room's hostility. Jimmy cut him off, not with anger, but with a calm, piercing dismissal, asking if intentions mattered when actions told. A different story. The rebuttal was a gut punch, and Elon recoiled, his hands dropping to his lap, defeated. The audience roared, their verdict clear, their allegiance shifting to the host who dared to topple a titan. Elon's eyes, glassy and lost, darted to the crowd, then away, finding no refuge. The segment stretched on, each second a lifetime for Elon, his humiliation complete. Jimmy stood, a rare move, his silhouette looming over the desk as he delivered. A final, resounding point that true strength lay in facing the messy, human parts of life, not just the stars. The crowd leapt to their feet, applause thundering as Elon remained seated, a small, broken figure dwarfed by the uproar. The triumph belonged to Jimmy, the night his to claim, while Elon's empire of bravado lay in tatters at his feet. The standing ovation shook the studio walls as Jimmy Fallon basked in the glow of his victory, his figure towering over the desk, while the audience roared their approval. Elon Musk remained a crumpled heap in the guest chair, a stark contrast to the host's commanding presence. The applause wasn't just for Jimmy's words, but for the catharsis of watching a giant fall, a man who'd soared above the world brought low by his own failures. Elon's hands rested limply in his lap, his face a mask of exhaustion and shame, the tears he'd fought to hide now staining his cheeks in silent streaks. The cameras lingered, merciless, etching his defeat into the annals of late-night history. Jimmy paced the stage, feeding off the crowd's energy, his voice rising to match their fervor. He spoke of redemption, not for Elon, but for those who'd been let down by the powerful, the ones left to pick up the pieces. The words weren't aimed at the guest anymore, they were a broader indictment, a sermon that turned the night into something bigger than one man's collapse. Elon's head stayed down, his breathing shallow, as if each cheer from the audience drove the air from his lungs. The crowd, electrified, hung on Jimmy's every syllable, their earlier judgment of Elon hardening into a shared resolve. Elon made one last feeble attempt to reclaim himself, lifting his gaze, his voice a rasp as he muttered something about time, about fixing things. But the effort was drowned out, the audience's noise swallowing it whole, their rejection absolute. Jimmy didn't even glance his way, his focus on the room, on the wave he'd unleashed. The host's stride was deliberate, his gestures wide, drawing the crowd into a crescendo of unity that left Elon on the outside, a spectator to his own disgrace. His shoulders trembled, a final shudder of resistance giving way to resignation. The segment neared its end, and Jimmy turned to face the audience fully, his back to Elon, a symbolic dismissal. He thanked them, his tone warm but firm, sealing the night with a promise that truth, however brutal, would always find its stage. The applause surged again, a wall of sound that buried Elon's presence entirely. He sat motionless, a broken relic in the shadow of Jimmy's triumph, the weight of his unraveling complete, his myth shattered beyond repair. The studio vibrated with the fading echoes of applause as Jimmy Fallon stood center stage, his arms outstretched, soaking in the crowd's adoration. The lights softened, casting a warm halo around him, a victor crowned by the night's relentless drama. Behind him, Elon Musk remained slumped in the guest chair, a forgotten figure, his silhouette swallowed by the host's towering triumph. The audience, still on their feet, radiated a fierce, unified energy, their cheers a testament to the reckoning they'd witnessed. Elon's face, pale and streaked with the aftermath of tears, stared blankly ahead, his hands limp, his spirit extinguished under the weight of the room's judgment. Jimmy turned to the desk, his movements deliberate, exuding a quiet confidence. As he prepared to close the show, he spoke of resilience, of the power in confronting hard truths, his words a bridge from the confrontation to a broader, hopeful note. The crowd listened, rapt, their earlier disdain for Elon giving way to a shared sense of purpose, a cleansing forged in the fire of the night's clash. Elon didn't move, didn't react. His presence reduced to a footnote, a cautionary tale etched into the evening's narrative. The cameras panned across the audience, capturing their nods, their applause, leaving Elon out of frame, irrelevant. The host's final remarks were a masterstroke, a blend of gratitude and resolve that sealed his dominance. He thanked the viewers, the studio crowd, for standing witness to a moment that mattered, his voice steady, unwavering. The audience erupted one last time, a thunderous ovation that shook the set, their approval a resounding stamp on Jimmy's victory. Elon sat, a ghost, in the uproar, his head dipping lower, the last vestiges of his pride dissolving into the noise. The man who'd once bent the world to his will was now a shell, his humiliation complete, his downfall irreversible. As the credits rolled, Jimmy stepped forward, shaking hands with the front row, his smile wide, unburdened. The lights dimmed, Elon still seated, a solitary figure in the fading glow, the audience already turning away, their focus on the host who'd claimed the night. The story ended there. No loose ends, no redemption offered, just a triumphant conclusion that left Jimmy standing tall and Elon broken beyond repair. The screen faded to black, the victory absolute, the lesson clear, etched into the hearts of all who'd watched.